She jumped onto the track during a horse race, trying to pin a suffrage banner on the king's horse, and got trampled, okay, to death.
I don't
You
know
know,
why I'm laughing at this.
I know, ridiculous.
It's like the perfect
40
comic
miles
strip
and-
of feminism. Like
Yeah, no,
animal
40
abuse,
miles
but I'm making my point, and she's dead because she was incompetent. Our next guest, one of my favorites, we've had her on quite a few times. YouTube.com/girlwriteswhat podcast gets a little wild and woolly. See, Karen Strawn, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for being here, sweetheart.
Oh, don't call me that. You don't have to lie like that. I'm not a sweetheart. You know it.
This is well, it's the way. Well, first off, this is FCC, so we know you can smoke and drink the wine, but we have to be careful with the
F-bombs?
Yes, every now and then. Just it's more so about Jared's job being difficult.
Okay. So if I accidentally drop one, you guys can bleep it out.
We can't. But come on now, I know what's going to happen next.
Well, this is why I can't run for office.
That's the least of your
Like,
concerns.
I really, there's just no way I could actually keep it clean.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump doesn't necessarily have to. So there's a silver lining of hope.
Well, okay, but Trump, he says the most outrageous things, but he never peppers them with F-bombs, does he?
No, he said he said bullshit once. Sorry, I have to bleep that. And he said a few things. I don't know. I don't care. His books though, and if you read his offhanded interviews a little more so. But all right, so we've got you here, Karen Strawn, for people who don't know. She's been on. She educated us one time as the light came on women's suffrage. But I wanted to talk about this first because you were on the now viral video with the Young Turks. You got into a debate with Cenk once.
Yeah, that was fun. He said at the outset that this is not going to be a debate. It's going to be an information expedition.
Right.
I just want to hear your point of view, and so that you can inform our viewers of what you think.
Right? Of course, I want to hear
Of
your point of view.
course.
Yeah.
Reasonable discussion.
Yeah, and then I think what set him off, because there were some things, like he seemed really uncomfortable through the whole thing, but he had to concede some points to me and essentially come out and say, well, okay, I agree with you on that. And I don't necessarily agree with you on that, but I don't find it completely out to lunch. And then he just got it in his head that he was gonna sort of bend me over and make me thank the suffragettes for getting me the vote.
Yeah.
And given what I know of the expansion of suffrage, the expansion of the franchise, I see no reason to thank the suffragettes. It would have happened regardless, whether they were there lobbing bombs at train stations or not, and going on hunger strikes and chaining themselves to
Right.
like the Parliament building. And
It's a far
and things
cry from the Fat Pride movement, I'll tell you that.
So essentially, I was just, I take a very nuanced view of the history of women's advancement. And so I look at both sides of the coin, and I look at not just the rights, but the responsibilities and all of those things and how things actually went down. And so I wasn't prepared to, say thank you, suffragettes, for doing this wonderful, glorious thing. And then he just flipped his lid. He just like started to go, oh, yada, 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 Karen, 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 and women in Saudi Arabia love the burqa. And then he was just like, give me a thank you for the suffragettes. And if not, stop voting and make me a ham sandwich.
Yes. So, if nothing else, he's a horrible ex-Muslim.
Yeah, it's not very halal.
No.
So yeah, the whole sandwich thing became a running joke among my
So you were never
viewers.
invited back, I take it.
Oh no, he said they always close. He and David Pakman closed their interviews with sort of, you're crazy, we'll have to have you back on. And then they just like, here's my phone, growing cobwebs and not ringing.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, they've never invited me. and I don't expect them to. But I did find I find it so funny how that, everyone who was in this video, for people who don't know, every single one had a legitimate grievance with the Young Turks, either being slandered or personally attacked. So it was just people who were bullied by the world's biggest YouTube channel having a chance to punch back. That's all it was. And it wasn't hard. I have a Rolodex of people, and there are other people lining up for the next video. But it's so funny how from 0 to 60, him and Anna Kasparian go to sexism right away. Remember her saying she should have F you, bitch. Remember that's what she said at Alex Jones? Like, wow. It just goes to show you their true nature.
It is one set of rules for me and another for thee. It's you sort of have this like a lot of the feminist criticism that I get is laced with all kinds of what they would call, absolutely bigoted stereotypes if it were directed at them. Oh, you look like a man, or things like that.
So you do have shorter hair than both me and Not Gay Jared, as you pointed.
That's right. That's right. And actually, I need a haircut right now. But.
Well, hold on real quick, because I want to get something specific. So we had Lierre Keith on, who is you may or may not know. She was an ex-vegan, so we agree on the veganism side. But she's a feminist. She was a hardcore feminist. She's like a neo-environmentalist. But she came out to me and was like, listen, I just can't believe these kids, like the Trigglypuffs, how she's been banned on campus for speaking out against the trans thing. So she's an anti-porn, sort of a third-wave feminist who doesn't buy into this whole new gender identity, so she doesn't really have a home. And when she was on with me, she's very sweet. And I offered her, I said, like, hey, do you think maybe you want to come on and do a debate? She's like, that's not really my forum. But she said, I did look into some of the stuff you talked about, and I haven't heard a lot of this before. So I don't agree with it, but it's compelling, and I sent her some of your stuff. So I think there's a lot of headway being made where there are a lot of people, even informed feminists, who are realizing it's not what they signed up for, and someone like you is a valuable resource.
I've actually had the pleasure of receiving emails from former feminists. Some of them were quite enthusiastic about their adherence to the ideology, to the whole sort of patriarchy theory, male privilege theory, female oppression, all of those sort of philosophical models, and who email me to thank me for waking them up.
Right.
And showing them the other side of the story that, because this is the side of the story that you don't tend to hear in gender studies classes. If you do hear it, you might hear that, men face discrimination too, men suffer from systemic problems too, but it's men's fault because patriarchy, right? So, and men would easily be able to solve these problems because patriarchy, because men are in charge of everything. Mm. And so it's essentially when they actually are exposed to the other half of the story, and exposed to, most people think that the suffragette movement was, it was women putting their lives on the line, to earn the vote for all women. And, so many of the suffragettes were racist as hell. That they were essentially saying, women need the vote before blacks because women are responsible and Negroes are not.
What they do with the Negro women?
We can't. And one of them, I forget whether it's Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, said, if we give blacks the vote before we give women the vote, what will become of our innocent white daughters? In other words, those blacks will have the right to go around free and stuff, and they'd be raping all over the place.
Right.
And one of them said that if blacks got the vote before women did, so black men before all women, black women would suffer an oppression under their own men that was worse than anything that they suffered under slavery. Yeah, so
compelling reason to gain women the right to vote, I guess.
And they, so many of them, they wanted the vote for wealthy women. They wanted 10-pound suffrage in the UK. Emmeline Pankhurst and Christabel Pankhurst, they wanted 10-pound suffrage, which meant that if you didn't have 10 pounds to pay at the polls, you did not get a vote, which would exclude the majority of the population at the time.
Which is funny. You know what's interesting about that, though, is because I don't want to rehash stuff you've talked about on the show before, but as Karen has pointed out, men who had the right to vote were also eligible for the draft, bucket duty. You know, I think so that translates to, well, a vote is a privilege even for women, where they wanted them to pay to, like, it wasn't unheard of that you don't just get to show up and vote. So even among women, there was a hierarchy.
Yeah, and also, you know, the act in the UK that brought women into the franchise actually brought 5 million men into the franchise. So 5 million men in the UK were disenfranchised when women got the vote. So it's, you know,
now why were they not allowed to vote?
I think that they did not have sufficient wealth, or they did not have income to pay taxes on, or something like that.
Right.
So, you know, it was essentially, you had the expansion went, you know, from 1835 or so onwards, and these brave suffragettes, not a like, there was one that I know of who died. She died in a publicity stunt gone wrong. She jumped onto the track during a horse race, trying to pin a suffrage banner on the king's horse, and got trampled, to death.
You know why I'm laughing at this.
I know, ridiculous.
It's just it's like the perfect comic strip of feminism. Like, animal abuse by making my point, and she's dead because she was incompetent.
Yeah, and then you had the Chartists in the UK. You had a group in Rhode Island. You had men who were fighting not just for universal franchise, but for broader electoral reforms. You know, against gerrymandering and all kinds of other things. They were fighting for secret ballots so that employers couldn't hold their employees' votes to ransom and things like that.
And isn't it funny how that's flipped, where now it's the unions fighting against secret ballots because they want to be able to break the thumbs of people who don't want to be in the union.
That's right. But you had these from 1835 or so onward in the UK, and in the US, you had these activists who were exiled to Tasmania. They died in prison, right? I mean, they were shot in the street, right? Those are the people who risked their lives for everybody's right to vote. The suffragettes, they had a special wing of the prison built for them with hot and cold running water in the UK.
Well, they have to keep their figure if they're going to go on a hunger strike. And if you're going to make the lemon cayenne maple tea, it has to be hot. So, okay, so here we are. Why is this your main? Because you're educated on a multitude of issues. Why do you feel compelled to make this your main thing? What is the end goal for Karen Strawn with, like you say, awakening women to sort of, I guess, the inherent problems with feminism?
Well, I think that's the first step to getting society back on track in terms of men and women trusting each other again. If you sort of go all the way back to the 1850s, when that first volley was sent from the feminist camp with the Declaration of Sentiments, there has been a gender war going on, right? And it's not good for society. It's not good for men. It's not good for women. It's definitely not good for children. And it's only just now that men are starting to actually put their foot down and say, you know, we've given you ladies everything that you've demanded, you know, all along, and it's enough, right?
Right.
Now, what I'm looking at is opening people's eyes to seeing that the sort of, because this is a layered problem. I mean, there's feminism, and then there's, you know, sort of politics and the law and media and all of that stuff. And then there's our natural chivalry that we have, I think that.
Oh, wait, darn, hold on a second. You had me enthralled. We have to go to a break. We'll bring her back. YouTube/Girl Writes What. Stay tuned. I'm so sorry. We'll have her back. Stay. Glad to be back. Karen Strawn back with us. Girl Writes What. She was dancing. See how she went along?
Oh, actually,
She got some moves.
No, not really. But that was actually
one of
my. That was one of my favorite songs way back in the day.
Andrew WK.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he's been on the show. He's a very introspective dude when you get him going.
A lot of those kinds of guys are. You know, they act. They put on a facade of being like complete. wild men, and then you get into their heads, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, I think particularly with the hard rockers, I think a lot of it because they're very Midwestern, very working class, and so they tend to be a little bit more accessible and a little more. They think a little more critically, as opposed to like, I don't know, the Nickelbacks or the LA sort of created bands like Alice Cooper, Iggy Pop.
Oh well, when you look at sort of that sort of elevated music, right? So you have these poetic kind of musicians who they write really profound lyrics and they want to make a statement and everything, right? They get that all out, and it's just they vomit it all out through their music. But the guys who are just like, when it's time to party, we will party hard. There's all that stuff still in there.
Yeah.
And yeah.
A good point. It's a good point in there. I think they've run out of band names now. What's the one I just heard? That was like Dear Tick. I'm like, oh my gosh, these people are really scraping the bottom of the barrel. These self-important.
Clearly a country band that's gone a little emo.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so Karen, we're talking about waking up young women and men. You say that you use the term gender war.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So what do you mean by that? What kind of a gender war is going on? Or you really just, because when I see it, I don't really see a gender war. I more so see it as attack and defend with sort of men in the castle, only it's not a castle. They're in a moat, and instead of throwing boulders, the feminists are just urinating in the moat and then lighting it on fire like the Cleveland River. This is just in my own mind.
Actually, I describe it as a gender war because that's exactly the terms of the terms of engagement right from the beginning. If you go back and you look at the Declaration of Sentiments, it really has been this the rhetoric is of a historically persecuted people who are rising up against their oppressors, right, and the unjust oppression that has been going on all this time. So it's essentially they worded it as if it was a slave uprising, or like a they're in front of the presidential palace and they're going to chop off his head.
Right.
Right. It's sort of this mob anger, all of this pent up.
Meanwhile, the president's
vitriol.
wife is bitching about him not hanging the curtains properly.
Yeah, well, it's really, and when you look at how men have they've been yes-deering.
It's true.
Like this whole time. Women's suffrage occurred the very same afternoon that the majority of women decided that they wanted it. And the suffragettes they changed their tactics after the early 1900s and the start of the 1910s. They had to change their tactics to convince women that they wanted it. And one of the ways that they did that was they essentially, because a lot of conservative women and anti-suffragette women saw politics as something that was dirty. It was a masculine sphere. It was full of manure and dirty knuckles and
right.
dirt
Well,
under
that's
your
an
nails.
important point. Let me clarify that for the audience who may not know, because sometimes you're too close to the forest to see the trees, because that's a very important point that a lot of people don't realize. Kind of like actors, you were traveling minstrels. It was not something that was praised. It wasn't this sort of exotic. It wasn't this bourgeoisie class. You were like, oh my gosh, you're an actor. It was like being a low-level mechanic's assistant. The same could be said in a different level of politicians. Mm-hmm. These were not people to be exalted. It's not like the celebrity show that it is now. So that's important context for people to get.
It very much is, and women, more conservative women were essentially this is dirty, filthy, nasty business, and women occupied at that time a place in society that was elevated in certain ways. They were seen as the moral arbiters of society. That's why they were so key in the abolitionist movement and so key in the prohibitionist movements, and in lots of other social movements through history.
Tell me about the prohibitionist movement, because you've talked about that. We haven't talked about that on this show. That was a big sort of notch on the belt buckle of women. They were the ones who really were the drivers with prohibition.
They absolutely were. Susan B. Anthony was giving an address to a dinner full of prohibitionist women, temperance union women, and she essentially said, everyone here understands that women are the moral voice of society. Women are the moral arbiters of society. We decide what is vulgarity. We decide what is suitable social behavior. And if women decided en masse to, or en masse if you're American, en masse to to frown on any man who desired the company of women in public after he had imbibed the devil's drink, no man would ever do so, right? That this is our place, right? In society is that we are able to set these standards and the standards will be followed. And you can see that all through. They also used to put on plays. They would go from town to town and they would put on these sort of temperance plays where you would have the man and his wife, and she was just this sweet, decorative, wonderful, pure woman,
Yes.
and he was this. He was a good guy till he started drinking, and then he'd turn into this horrible brute. And
Sounds like not gay Jared after a pina colada.
and he'd start beating her and
Apple
stuff. So I
teens.
mean, they were actually using domestic violence against women as a piece of propaganda to encourage temperance movements and encourage people to frown on drinking. So, and this is long before feminists came along in the 60s to
Sure.
tell us all that beating your wife is wrong. So,
Well, I mean, it depends on the circumstance, right? It depends, especially with the swapping of gender roles. For example, not gay Jared could easily be. I mean, you take it. You take it how I give it to you when he's out of
fair.
line. All right, we have to. You know what? Let's do a web extended here for people who don't know. She's in Canada, so it's a pre-tape. I didn't let you know until the end. Right away, she takes a cigarette as soon as web extended. Ah!
I was smoking through the whole thing. I just.
Cheese
whatever.
and crackers. The FCC's been on my ass.
Cheese and crackers?
I don't know. It's something my old smoking aunt
Fuck
would
is
say.
that? Yeah, well. We all know what you mean.
Jiminy Cricket, I tell you, the FCC's really got my hair in a bundle. I don't have much of it left.
My mom always gets after my boys for saying frickin'. She's like, we know what you mean.
My
Right.
wife's grandmother, Grandma Ruth. I told you this story, right? Not get Jared. She was 94 now, 93.
Remember.
And my wife does not. She never cusses. And she said something like, "Oh, freaking," and she said freaking. And my 94-year-old grandmother-in-law, she goes, "Don't use that." She said, "What?" She said, "If you want to say fucking, just say fucking," just like that. And I've never heard her cuss, but she's like at the age.
Why not at that age?
And then she goes, "But I'd rather you didn't, because it's not something a woman should say." And she's 94, but she just came out with it. We're like, oh my gosh, Grandma Ruth. So,
There you go.
Didn't know you had it in you.
well, she also she's going with a specific blood thinning medication. She's paying like 5 times as much for the one that still allows her to drink all day.
Oh, I would too.
Yes. So at a certain point, she's like, you know what? I'm 94. I'm just going to stop taking the medication or drink.
Well, if you drink enough, your blood gets awfully thin to begin with. So
That's
she
true.
could just replace the one with the other.
Well, you know what's funny is they tell you don't take any fish oil or like vitamin D and K because that'll help thin your blood. Like, so don't take that. And they told her don't eat spinach, but take this medication to thin your blood. And well, why don't you just eat fish and the spinach?
Yeah.
I don't know. This is how it works. Okay, before we get off on that, and you got your sig going. What was it we were talking about? Oh, the prohibition. So let me ask you about this with the prohibition, though. Yeah, because I get it. Women started it, right? And they but how at a certain point, feminists are going to say, well, yeah, but it still required men in power. How did they get into the ears of all the men who ended up pushing it? Seems like a tough sell.
Oh no, women were extremely politically active back then. I mean, like, all you have to do is look at petitions to the government made by suffragettes and anti-suffragettes. I mean, there were like tons of politically active women out there, usually from the middle class and upper middle class, and often they were at odds with each other. So you essentially have to assume. If you're going to assume that women had no power, even though they were politically active, they had these large, well-funded groups, lobby groups, like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and other groups like that, you would have to assume that men just did not care about women. men in power have always, there have always been laws protecting women from the excesses of men. Always, always, always. And very, very few laws protecting men from the excesses of women. So they're working under the assumption that men in power will not take women's needs and desires into consideration when they're making decisions, and that's just never been the case.
Something
But one
interesting
of
to
the-
me that you just sort of you just touched on is you said, they were often at odds, right? Wealthier women and poorer women. We sort of see that as the case with politics in general, but it almost means that back then women were more individualistic because now women, rich, poor, are seen as one voting block, right? You have a uterus, you're this voting block. Whereas back then women could be conservative, they could be liberal, they could be wealthy, they could be poor. It depended on the individual. Now it's just woman, Democrat, or Trudeau for you guys.
Well, that's I think an invention of the left. It's not true at all. There are tons of conservative women out there. There are tons of women in Canada who do not like Trudeau, who would rather have another Stephen Harper government, who would rather have a more libertarian government. There are tons of women out there who do not agree with other women on issues, and the idea that we are just sort of this hive mind Borg-like, we are Borg, we are vagina, and we're all going to vote in one direction is absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that it is apparently the political party or the political camp of that is supposed to be for women's equality, for women's, personhood, and all of those things, that is the one that is essentially saying, women who vote conservative, women like Sarah Palin, women like Ann Coulter, they're not real women.
Right.
They're like honorary men or something like that. Because if they were actually women, they would have the same opinions that we do. That is actually rendering women's personhood down to their one body part, the one requisite body part.
And the same thing with fat pride. It's happened with my mom, and it's happened with my wife, who are both they've always been thin. My mother-in-law is very thin. And someone said, I don't know what she was asking. I don't know what she's a size. She said she's very tall. I don't know, maybe a size 4. I have no idea. Not a big size. He said, no, we only have size for real women. It's like, oh, okay. So when you say normal Barbie, well, guess what? There are a lot of women out there shaped like my wife as well. Naturally,
Yeah.
she's a little bit thin, actually, compared to probably Barbie, because she's just, and she was made fun of it her whole life, tall and lanky, right? Well, how's the weather up there? But the victim class of the day is Trigglypuff, is the fat, ugly women, and so it's okay to excoriate the attractive women because they're not real women.
Of course. Well, real women have curves, right? And I guess I am a real woman, at least in that regard. Other than my freaking football player shoulders here, but and my suspicious lack of ass.
Oh my
But,
gosh, that's the opposite of my wife and I. We both have giant asses on relatively.
Oh, I wish. I'd love to have something that would actually hold my pants up, but I think it's essentially, and you see this coming from feminists too, right? That there's supposedly, feminism is supposedly the radical notion that women are people. Well, you would think that people have a variety of viewpoints and a variety of opinions, and they have their own thoughts and their own views.
Right.
And so this idea that we all have to think the same way, otherwise we're not real women, is it's very, very hypocritical. It's
and the
extremely
shapes and
strange.
sizes. I've talked about this. A lot of people are like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this unrealistic picture of beauty." I go, hold on a second. If you look in men's magazines, or you look when men are voting, the most beautiful women, like on that same list, you'll have Kate Upton, you'll have Taylor Swift, and Kim Kardashian. The beauty is there is a very wide spectrum. It's just don't be abnormally crazy thin, and don't be borderline diabetes. Let's say, to give an example, let's say you're the average height, was it 5'6" for one? You can find a majority of men, provided you have a decent personality, you put yourself together, a majority of men will be perfectly fine with a 5'6" woman, anywhere from probably 110 to, let's say, maybe 210. There's a pretty big gap there where men are like, okay, and then once you get to the point of Trigglypuff size, well, no. When you get to anorexic, men don't have this. They want to see you naked, regardless. That's what it's where you see it is the women's magazines edited by gay men.
Oh yeah, no, and they're edited by women too, right?
Yeah. And
you look at the sort of the tabloids that are marketed towards women, and you'll never guess whose beach body this is, and they show like these horrible lumpy thighs, right, of this woman bending over in her bikini, right, and it's all about, you know, because that's a famous person, right? That's a celebrity who they're showing in that photo, and it's all about making. It's all about either making ordinary women feel insecure about their bodies, or it's about ordinary women being able to point and laugh at wealthier women, higher status women than them who have lumpy thighs, right? Or saggy tits or whatever. And, you know, like it's like people don't want to address there's a viciousness in women. An absolute ruthless viciousness in women. And, you know, one of the most interesting things that I came across was, God, and I forget where it was, but it was this sort of, it was from like 1,000 years ago or something like that in a novel set 1,000 years ago, involving Muslims and jihad and the whole bit. And the big threat that you gave the enemy was, you know, if you don't tell us what we want to know, we're going to hand you to the women.
Oh God, really?
Because torture is women's work.
Oh gosh, that is.
Right?
If you could give me that when we're done with find the source, I would love to read that.
I'll try and find it, but I mean, like, if you look at, I mean, there's stories.
Just a talisman with an apron, like ah.
There are stories coming out of, stories coming out of the Congo of women who were kidnapped by militants, and the women. The female militants were the ones who claimed certain female prisoners as, you know, this one is ours. And the only reason why those female prisoners came out alive was because when the women were done with them and bodies totally destroyed, you know, like uteruses slashed to shreds, just absolutely brutalized.
Yeah.
The only reason they're still alive is because the men stepped in and said, no, you're not going to kill her. We'll just leave her here.
It makes sense because women are naturally more compassionate, probably, I would say, and then they're more able to disconnect the other way if there's an effective motive, right? They're probably able to vilify men more. You know, how often do you, Fatal Attraction, right? Where they're boiling the pet rabbit and stuff. Like, no man, they're not going to boil the kid's pet rabbit. But a woman is like, well, it's going to hurt him. So... Yeah, that makes sense. I would like to see the historical documentation. But on the flip side, you've made great progress with the first female prime minister, so that's got to be exciting.
Oh, you.
Oh, me.
No, he does have very wavy hair.
Well, then he wears so much
There's
makeup.
a uterus in there somewhere.
He's like the Zac Efron. He wears so much makeup, that guy.
You know, don't badmouth women by calling Trudeau one of us.
That's true.
Very misogynistic.
I saw him box. That's like it was just so clearly set up. The guy has never really boxed. It was embarrassing, and they told him it's like he was the only one not in on the gag. That he thought he was having a fight. You know? Oh, did you weep when that happened?
I didn't see it. I didn't see.
No, I mean when he became prime minister.
When he became, no, I just rolled my eyes and moved on. I mean, it's essentially, it was better than the available alternative, which would have been Tom Mulcair, NDP.
Yeah, there was no conservative option at that point, which is so weird because Canada was doing so well under Harper. Like, I don't know if it's just you just didn't appreciate how well you were doing. But
I think, Harper made some missteps, and the missteps that he made were not ones that would be forgiven in the media. They were ones that, the media just harped on and harped on. I mean, he limited the journalists' access to the parliament and things like that. One of the things that he didn't do, though, was he didn't say, okay, well, Sun News is welcome here, but CBC and CTV, you can go take a hike.
Right.
You're not allowed. That was actually something that Rachel Notley in Alberta did, was she kicked out specific media organizations from access to the legislature. based on negative stories. That
Which
they
is
publish.
important though for Americans to know, because I've talked about this, like the Donald Trump, the idea that he's so thin-skinned and he wants to have increased libel laws to be able to sue media. I have a huge problem with that. I do want Americans to understand you don't need to go to Venezuela. When we talk about media in Canada, it's entirely government funded. So they have a vested interest, Radio Canada, CBC, they have a vested interest, obviously. I mean, there was a $100 million bonus from the NDP, a $150 million bonus, unless I'm switching the two up, from the Liberal Party if they were elected in the form of a grant. Literally, to Americans watching, politicians in Canada will say, well, if you elect my party, CBC is going to get another $150 million. So it's a little bit more nuanced than in the States banning like CNN.
And when you look at it too, like there are private media companies. I mean, CBC is the one that's government funded. I don't think that the rest get a whole lot of funding.
What's the rest in Canada? When I was there, it was just CBC, Radio Canada, and Quebec.
CTV is a national news broadcaster. They have a 24-hour news station. Global News is actually it's spread out across the entire country. It's national media. The Sun News was, they went under, Ezra Levant's project there. They went under after they successfully sued the CRTC.
Well, I used to do Michael Corn's show every single week, and now he's gone off the deep end, and he won't come on this show.
Yeah, he's had a little bit of a change of heart, but
he's done that several times, I've found out.
Yeah, well, I mean, but he, like Sun News was there is a requirement with the CRTC that cable companies have to present, they have to provide certain stations as part of their basic packages.
Yes.
And so every cable company in Canada has to carry CTV, and it has to carry CBC. CTV News 1 and CBC 24-hour news station, right? Because it's supposed to be a politically balanced news provider that's accessible across the country, right? Now, Sun News was conservative. They were the only conservative national news source that ran a 24-hour station.
Right.
And they were not. There was no regulation that required them to be covered by cable providers. And so I think there was only one major provider that carried them. I think it was Shaw. And so essentially what you had was they're working at a disadvantage, right? Because they just can't get into the basic cable packages.
Right, I remember, and that was their constant thing, and it was a silly business model to try and hinge on that. They had all of this. They were the least effective with online media, and they wanted to not force the government's hand. I think that was one of the main things that Ezra Levant was very, very clear on, was that he did not want to have the government force the market to carry them. And then eventually they were like, well, we're going to die if we don't. And it's because, we're not the ones who created this interference in the market. It's just we have to use it in order to survive. And, hate the game, not the player, I guess. And so they actually won their suit, but by the time they did, the money had run out.
They were toast. Yeah,
would have been interesting to see with Pierre Trudeau, everything that's going. Did I say Pierre? Justin Trudeau. Mm-hmm. Gosh, I keep getting that wrong because I don't know. I mean, obviously we had another prime minister, Pierre Trudeau. They're all dicks. Okay.
Well, Pierre Trudeau looked like a rat.
Yes.
And Justin Trudeau looks like I don't know.
He looks like
sweetie.
He'd be better on Gossip Girl than he would be in charge of any kind of world leadership role. The guy is just everything about him. I just want, like, I know this isn't a lucid argument. I understand, and this is not a reasonable. I just want to punch him in the face. Like, it's just that urge. I would never do it. I would never condone it. He'll probably get pied because that happens in Canada. We don't get assassination.
But if it happened, you would retweet it.
I don't know that I would retweet it, but just something about everything. He's just so smug all the time.
He's smarmy.
Yes.
Smarmy.
Yeah. Yes. I don't feel that way about Bill Clinton. I don't feel that way about Joe Biden. But there's some about Justin Trudeau.
Bachelorette kind of stink.
I don't know. You get Joe Biden to talk about certain issues, and the smarm comes out. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. He used to be an Irish drunk.
Like self-defense. Those kind of topics.
Self-defense, fire a shotgun into the air. Do you remember that one? No, he just said you don't. He's like, you don't need 30 rounds. I tell my wife we get a double-barreled shotgun, and if anyone's at the house, you fire 2 rounds into the air. We're like, that's a crime. That's highly illegal. All right.
Yeah, well,
Well, looks like you guys are stuck with him for a while. So that's good for you. Good for your employment because you're, anti-establishment kind of.
Oh God, yeah, I guess it's good for me. It sucks for everybody else. Especially like Alberta right now, we're really suffering because of the price of oil and all of that. And it's 90% of our economy, 90% of the money changing hands is essentially it's oil money in Alberta.
Right.
It came from oil, even if it's it's several steps removed from it. And we have NDP here and in Alberta, and they are completely anti-oil.
Oh, sure.
And the federal liberals, they aren't really big on oil either. And
Well, nice to be back there. Jack Layton was a punchline, and now the NDP has control of entire provinces. It's bizarre. It's a weird topsy-turvy world, Karen.
it's horrible. It's horrible, especially after what happened in Ontario and what happened in BC when the NDP got in.
Yeah, I just think Canadians don't get it. I really don't think they understand sometimes the ramifications. It's kind of like, well, okay, that was pretty well, but I think I'm tired of Harper. Let's try this guy. You're like, that's not how
Yeah.
it works.
No.
Okay, well, we've got this as extended version. We can give it to Karen. This is probably on your channel if people are watching it. Where can people best find you?
Where can people best find me? Everywhere.
Like
I
a
am
ghost.
omnipotent.
Look behind you. That's where the Karens.
She moved in the trees like a
be.
ghost. Like a ghost.
A.
All right, I don't know what happened here. All right,
I
listen,
don't
we're going to
either.
end it. It's done. No, we just ended it, and now this is the end card with little buttons. You don't do end cards on your channel?
I don't do end cards. That's like begging for money and shit, right?
Well,
no, it's not. You're just like,
press
hey.
this down here. It won't do
Send me
anything, but
the
you'll feel
shekels.
better about it.
Yeah. Your shekels. Press down here. Yeah, if I had a phone, like, I don't do end cards, but you can donate to my Patreon.
Oh, yeah, no.
You do Patreon. You're the
Yeah.
one who begging for money.
Oh yeah, no, shekels, like I said. Okay, wait. Give them to me. Give me all your shekels.
This is This is a family show.
This took a weird turn.
Took a weird. Well, for
And
you,
this is also the longest end card in the history of end cards.
this is. Oh, it's still going.
This is still the end card. Isn't that weird?
Gosh, do we have a mystery box?
Yeah, there's one right there.
Where?
Right
over there.
Right.
Oh, that's right. Karen's never done the mystery box. What could it be?
Right there.